How are you looking at the opportunity? Investors used to tell their portfolio companies to go and list elsewhere in different geographies, but now the conversation is also pivoted to listing in India and being market ready for India. So, are you seeing that across all your portfolio companies and investments?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, as a Japanese investor, I think we recognize this or we appreciate this even more. The companies get listed in Japan very early. So the median valuation of companies at IPO in Japan is anywhere between 70 to 110 million dollars. In India, it's like 10x of that. I think the digitization wave that has gone through the country, particularly in payments, has really, you can say, woken up investors to the potential of what can happen in India. Not just from a market perspective, but also from the perspective of adoption of technology. Most other global funds as well, I think, are in India for the long story.
Welcome to the India Opportunity Podcast. Our guest today is Anjani, partner and India head at Global Brain Corporation, a venture capital firm based out of Japan. They have close to $2 billion in assets under management and a phenomenal track record of investments in over 350 companies, 35 IPOs, and 71 mergers and acquisitions. Their India portfolio includes over 12 companies. Previously, Anjani was at the Gates Foundation for 9 years as their India head, where he led private sector investments focused on impact. He's also worked in banking at Fidelity and Morgan Stanley on the derivatives trading side. So much to learn from a global leader like Anjani, who's had a fantastic career investing in the private sector. We've covered a lot of interesting topics in this conversation. Everything from his experience of working with Bill Gates to the Japanese economy and in depth about his investing philosophy and his experience of investing in India as well. I really look forward to sharing Anjani's story with you all today. Hey Anjani, thrilled to have you on board. Welcome to the show and thank you so much for doing this.
Great to be here, Shrishti. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, it was great to meet you in Gurgaon when you were here last time. But I always love to start with the question of people's early childhood memories and what were their formative experiences growing up. Can you share some of the early experiences or influences that in your life that led to a career in venture capital?
Sure. To be honest, my career has been a meandering experience at best. So it's hard to put a finger on one thing that led to where I am today. But having said that, I grew up in different parts of India. My dad used to work at Coal India Limited. So a lot of small towns in central India where a lot of coal mines are.
Yeah.
So most of my childhood was in public sector companies because where you have Coal India, you also have NTPC, you have aluminum plants and
Yeah.
other mining companies as well. But then I went to college in Assam and studied mechanical engineering, and then to University of Louisiana in Lafayette for computer science. And from then on, my career started, and started like one step in front of the other, and led to where I am today. But if I have to put a finger on one thing, that led me to go beyond engineering, which is what most, at least people from my background, go for, was essentially a book that I read much later in my life about genocide in Rwanda in 1994,
Yeah.
which essentially opened me to world beyond computer science and finance, and led me to exploration of other things I could be doing in my life.
Wow, that book must have had a real impact on you to, go from what you were doing into computer science and then going towards maybe the world of impact investments. So, is that why you had stints at foundations because impact was so key and was a key driving force in your life?
Partly, yes. Just to maybe step back a little bit, after graduating from college, I started, my first job was in New York at Fidelity, where
Yeah.
I was into building technology for commercial banking. And then I went to Morgan Stanley in the equity derivatives team. But it was then when I first came across this book at the United Nations bookshop across the street from my office, and uh, I picked the book just out of curiosity more than anything else. And of course, the book was about the tragedy that happened in Rwanda. But what struck me most was the authors. You know, it was written by two journalists. It was a first-hand experience they had in that country, and that got me thinking that there is perhaps more to life than programming and trading derivatives.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, I think I started off from there, not necessarily thinking about impact, but perhaps doing more with the time I have.
Right.
And then, of course, coincidentally, I got a job at United Nations, and my life took a trajectory different from where I was headed. But I think that's how the book had an influence on me.
Wow. And, just out of curiosity, because not everyone will go and select that book, right? So, are you into that kind of literature in terms of fiction, non-fiction? What do you like to read?
Well, honestly, the only book I had read, prior to that, and that is, I'm talking about a bit late in life. Like I was probably 25, 26, maybe even 26 years old, and the only books I had read until then was textbooks or the books that I had to read to prepare for, the English language exam to get into United States.
Right.
And I had no interest in reading books at all. And the only reason I picked that particular book was because it was available at a 50% discount. And I was like, okay, this sounds like a good deal for $10, you know. And but of course, that sparked an interest in the world in general, reading, and today I read a lot more than I used to.
Love it. There's such a deep story behind the move, right, in terms of how it impacted your career. But, let's also talk about your time in banking, because that is a very different lifestyle to now that you've transitioned to venture capital. What were some of the learnings that you took away from your banking experience to your venture capital world now?
Yeah, see, that's an interesting question because, of course, banking was where I spent, if you can call it, the formative years of my career. First 6 or 7 years
Yeah.
was split between Fidelity and Morgan Stanley, and that too in New York, which is also a very different and special city. And I think, there was so much to learn, starting from just how to be a professional. Coming out of college, when you are writing code, and that too writing code for banking systems, which are highly critical and a very low threshold for failures. It was my first grounding in not to take things for granted. Where every line of code that you are writing, uh, it has to be of the highest standard, and literally starting from a point where there can be no mistakes.
Yeah.
And so I felt like that was a very strong lesson, or initial strengths, if you will, that I built, in that environment. But also, I also learned some bad habits. Banking in New York is a very cutthroat environment. Uh, People with very little patience. Um, I'm not kidding when I say that it's common for traders to literally throw phones at each other on the trading floor during market hours, or speak to each other in a very the worst choice of words that you can imagine. And I picked up on some of that, because as a young professional, that's sort of cool, and
Yeah.
you try to emulate that. So I had, coming out of that, I had to get rid of those bad habits as well, which are not conducive for any environment outside of that specific situation. So
Right.
it's a combination of many things, but also, I think one unique experience I had was working with people from a lot of countries. As my first experience out of college, I worked with, my team had people from Nepal, Turkey, Russia, America, of course. And from day one, I had that experience. Uh, and that is, again, I feel perhaps had an impact on me, that even today, I always seek environment where I can be exposed to multiple nationalities, multiple countries. And if it's just India or if it's just one country, it sort of gets boring.
Wow, there's so much that we can unpack there, like going from a small town and Assam to then New York and being in banking, which is one of the most, I would say, hardest jobs to get into, but also one of the hardest experiences to go through as a young individual. And that too with so much responsibility of managing money flow, in Fidelity and Morgan Stanley. What were you thinking at that point? Did you think that you were going to be in banking throughout your life at that point?
Uh, you know, yes and no. I would say yes because I didn't know any better. All I knew was that this is the world that exists. Because if you're living in New York and working in finance, you're surrounded by people, uh, you know, from that essentially type of jobs. So for me, the world was very small, and also as a young professional living in New York, life is great. You're working, you're having fun. Why even think about doing anything different?
Yeah.
Uh, so I was not really thinking about doing anything more than what I was already. But I think there were always these coincidences that would happen that would expose me, or that would help me peek into the world outside. For example, I remember when I was at Morgan Stanley, there was a new team being formed that was focused on microfinance. And I didn't have much idea about what microfinance is, but I read about it and then found it interesting. So I spoke to the person who was leading that team. And even though I did not get selected for it, but I built a good relationship with the leader of that team, and over the years he helped me learn a lot more about other ways of financing outside of derivatives trading.
Right.
uh, so these experiences, I feel like, sort of add up over time to take you to where I am today.
Amazing. And let's talk about your experience working at the different foundations, the Dell Foundation and then the Gates Foundation. At the Gates Foundation, you were there for 9 years. I'm sure you must have incredible stories to share. What were some of the biggest moments for you while working at the Gates Foundation?
Yeah, see, in general, both Dell and Gates are, amazing places to work for, and both have very unique, you can say, personalities.
Yeah.
I think I was very lucky to get a job at the Dell Foundation, to be honest. After I completed my MBA, because I was looking for a job into impact investing, but it's very difficult to find a job into impact investing. Um and it just so happened that that was the first and perhaps the only year when Dell Foundation recruited from campus at the ISB.
Right.
So I got hired there, and again played a really the foundation is a very unique place because it is one of the unique foundations that does a good job of straddling between public sector and private sector. And therefore, you will hear a lot about how the foundations realize the relevance of uh, harnessing the innovation and scale of private sector, and combining that with the scale and role of government policies and investments in order to achieve large scale impact. But it's a very difficult thing to pull off in reality because you need people with different skill sets. You are essentially working with two very difficult and different set of stakeholders, and to be able to bring those together into a coherent strategy is not an easy thing to pull off.
Yeah.
And that's what I think at Dell Foundation I learned the most in terms of how to do that right. And to even though I'm not in fully aware of what they're doing today, but I believe it's one of the few places in the world that does a good job of bringing those two strengths together. Gates Foundation, on the other hand, is a different entity altogether. As you know, it's perhaps the world's second largest philanthropic organization.
Yeah.
and has footprints across multiple sectors: agriculture, financial services, healthcare, education in United States, in different countries across the world, in Africa, India, other parts of Southeast Asia, and so on. So there, the biggest learning I had, honestly, was, and the opportunity I had was to work across multiple countries. That's an experience which is very rare for people to have,
Yeah.
where you are, based out of Seattle, but yet working in East Africa, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria, and Burkina Faso in West Africa. At the same time, working with global multilateral organizations like the IMF, World Bank, IFC, and essentially trying to solve problems at a scale which very few organizations can.
Yeah.
So it's no longer about executing small projects or making an individual investment, but but the level of thinking is, okay, how do we eradicate a disease? Or how do we increase incomes of small farmers from X to 3X? So the scale at which you have to imagine the problems are much larger at Gates Foundation. And that's also really helpful, because oftentimes, we are very much, as investors, we are thinking about the portfolio companies that we have.
Yeah.
Uh, and and it's a double-edged sword, because often, as an investor now, when I'm investing into companies, I have to look at metrics for that specific company. But given my grounding at some of these larger organizations, like UN or Gates Foundation, I can't stop myself from thinking, okay, but how does it change anything for the world? And sometimes, the two lenses are not complementary. You need to stay focused for the smaller objectives that you have with a specific investment, and not necessarily make things too complicated by thinking about solving a larger issue.
Yeah, those are very interesting experiences, right? Because, like you're saying, the Gates Foundation actually works at a scale which no organization can really compete with, given the kind of effort that they do across the globe. So, did that help you define some of the sector focus that you wanted to have in your experience in terms of, which industry stood out to you more than the others?
Yeah, see, I think yeah, it perhaps goes back to the time when I was at the United Nations. I spent a year there. I think one of the core, you can say, principles that I have uh, adopted or built or cultivated is that a solution to a lot of problems or large problems lies in economic growth. And uh, and therefore I inherently gravitate towards problems that can help unlock economic growth.
Right.
And when it comes to countries in Africa or Asia or in most emerging economies, uh, the truth is that agriculture and MSMEs are the core economic engine for these economies to take the next step in terms of increasing income of large populations. And that's the opportunity I got at the Gates Foundation to focus on these areas, and I figure out how you can significantly transform these sectors into real economic engines, which are contributing to GDP growth and employment, and of course, increasing productivity of population. Uh, and so I gravitated towards these sectors: agriculture, financial services, in my time at the foundation. Uh, and then, of course, in my current role, it's expanded to many more areas than those.
Fascinating. And while we'll talk about your current fund as well, I have to ask you, did you interact with Bill Gates while you were there? And what is he like in person?
Well, in a few meetings, so of course we'll have annual strategy review meetings where he would participate. So there are many teams at the foundation, and every team would present their strategy and what they have accomplished, what are the challenges once every year to Bill. And of course, there will be some learning sessions where we are presenting a new idea or a new topic that we want to explore as a foundation. So in some of those meetings, yes, I was there, over the years where I engaged with Bill. But you know, the experience is, I would say, uh, you can see how quickly he can grasp large amounts of information, because the foundation is not known for being succinct. It's like, any topic is, can lead to hundreds of pages of documents and slides and so on. But you could see that how much capability that he has to distill all that material and ask insightful questions to get to the core of the issue. I think that's something which I learned a lot from those meetings, and some of that I try to carry on in my current roles as well.
Amazing. And you moved to Tokyo 3 years ago to join Global Brain Corporation and lead its investments in India. Tell us about that decision and about what motivated you to take that leap, and perhaps highlight a few investments that can help our audience understand what type of companies you're looking to back.
Yeah, yeah. I joined the fund about 2.5 years back, and the decision was primarily based out of I think two factors. One was that just like we were discussing earlier, I think that working for a venture capital fund gave me a better opportunity to to build on my personal thesis of leveraging private sector for large scale impact, which I thought working at foundations was not possible to do at a large scale. And combined with that was the fact that the fund itself was significantly bullish about India and wanted to expand its portfolio in India. So in some sense, it was also an entrepreneurial opportunity to
Right.
build the fund in India. So I think the overall prospect was very exciting in terms of what I wanted to do, but also a new challenge for me to take on. And combined with the fact that it was a Japanese fund, I think that also sort of closed the deal for me, because I felt that that will add a new dimension to who I am as a person, in terms of understanding how to operate in the Japanese social, cultural, and business context, build a network of people that I would otherwise never be able to reach, and those two things came together for me to make this decision. And the last 2.5 years, I would say, more or less have delivered against those expectations. We have expanded very rapidly in India, and some of the investments we have made so far are quite exciting. For example, we invested in a company based in Delhi. It's called Biome, which is essentially increasing access to high-speed broadband internet for people in India. As you may know, the number of people who have access to fixed line broadband connections is still minuscule in India. It's below 10%, compared to 60 to 80% in other comparable developing countries. We also invested in a space tech company, Digantara, which is building a very unique technology to track debris in space. Because as the number of assets in space increase, the risk that these assets face from existing debris in space, both from other satellites that have been abandoned to other factors like space radiation, that risk increases. So Digantara is building technology to protect your assets from space-based and ground-based sensors. Uh, we also invested in a company called ByteBeam, which is essentially building the core underlying IoT software and hardware for electric vehicles, and essentially trying to build a platform on which multiple EVs can operate. And in addition to EVs, it can also support other industrial devices and other industrial vehicles, for example, vehicles in ports or other industrial facilities, but its software becomes the underlying backbone on top of which the electric vehicles can operate. But the fundamental thesis for us is remains that in India we want to back companies which are essentially building for a large market, which we see evolving in India. But I believe we see that opportunity slightly differently, or at least the way we are trying to build our thesis is that we are not necessarily investing in products that uh, that Indians will consume as their income grows. But we would like to invest in products that will contribute to increasing the income growth.
Right.
Uh, and therefore, there are certain areas that we are prioritizing, include areas like climate tech in India, or healthcare, or financial services, agriculture and food, manufacturing and construction, and also certain areas in deep tech like space, biotech, or life sciences, um, semiconductors, and and that's the lens with which we are viewing the Indian market. But as very well, VC is also about being opportunistic. So while we do have a lens through which we look at our investments, we also cannot say no to a good opportunity that comes to us outside of this thesis.
Yeah, that's very interesting because, as someone who's based domestically, I think I'm hearing a lot more from investors and family offices how India is a consumption focused market. So a lot of capital is actually flowing towards the consumption sector overall. But you're talking about a very different lens to the whole ecosystem where you're talking about enhancing the capita income. And while that is supposed to happen, and, everyone is betting on that to happen, but people are making consumption focused bets rather than the income growing segment. So is that a conscious choice, and what is the reason behind that decision?
Yeah, I think so. See, I think there are a couple of factors. One is that because we are a global fund, we every any investment we make, we also have to uh, uh, look at the trade-offs. Like, if I'm investing in a particular yeah, technology or a product in India, is that the best use of our capital compared to a similar product or technology that could be available in another market in North America or Europe? So when it comes to pure consumption-led plays, often it's not that straightforward to make a case for that trade-off.
Got it.
Because just as an example, if we are investing in uh, let's take a SaaS product for providing online mental health services. The question comes, should I be investing in such a product in the United States or in India for a global investor like us?
Yeah.
Uh, and then the solving that question becomes a bit more tricky for us. However, if we are investing in something, in a product like, say, MSME finance, where we see the large market, in India, and when we look at the competitive landscape in other geographies, it's relatively clear in our mind on why that market is more attractive in India compared to other countries where we can invest the same money.
Right.
And so that's one core, I would say, learning, having explored a lot of opportunities and tried to make these trade-off decisions, where we have landed today. You know, um, but like I was saying, there are always some very interesting consumption driven ideas that come to us, that we look at, and I would not be surprised if we do end up making some of those investments. But the reason we do need to have a thesis to work with is also because we are a relatively small team looking at a large and complex market like India.
Yeah.
So we cannot look at anything and everything that is happening and helping some guardrails or guidelines helps us focus our time and energy as well.
Yeah, of course. And what is the sweet spot for you in terms of stage and size of the company when you decide to partner with them?
Yeah, very straightforward. We are seed to Series B stage companies. That's where we invest, and a ticket size of up to $4 million is what we invest in a company. And also, one interesting thing about us is that we have our flagship fund, which is a typical blind pool fund that we invest from, but we also manage 20 corporate venture capital funds, which are essentially single LP funds, and where LPs are large Japanese corporates like Sony, Mitsubishi, etc. And sometimes we may also pool monies from multiple funds to invest in a company, in which case sometimes the check size may go larger as well.
And what would you say is the total size of the fund overall if you were to look at it, like the fund size in terms of assets under management,
It's almost $2 billion under management.
including the 20 corporate funds?
Yes,
Got
yes,
it. Okay,
correct.
very interesting. And I think that will give a lot of clarity to founders who might want to reach out to you in terms of fundraising. But let's also talk about what's happening in Japan since you're based out of there. Given all the
Mhm.
news around the Japan economy and the carry trade blow up, can you share what's really going on the ground in Japan? $20 trillion seems to be the exposure to these carry trades, and a lot depends on the central bank's decision around interest rates. As someone who's living there, what are some of the things that you were observing on ground?
Yeah, see, our fund, because it is based in Japan, one of the related aspects of the macroeconomy which affects us as well is the US dollar to Japan exchange rate.
Yeah,
Because most of our funds are raised in Japanese yen. As the yen depreciates, it also affects our ability to invest in dollars in companies outside Japan. But coming back to some of the headlines around the carry trade blow up, as you mentioned, I think where we are landing today, or at least what I understand is the current sentiment, is that there was definitely a lot more hysteria than substance in the whole news cycle. You know, as you know, right, the interest rates were increased by 25 basis points. Uh, and still, like, it's minuscule. If you look at the 10-year government bond interest rate, it's still minuscule compared to 4% or in the US.
yeah,
Um, but the reason for that interest rate is increase, as we all know, right? The monetary policy in Japan has been very easy for the last decade or so, which was intentional
yeah,
because they wanted to work towards having higher inflation. But now that has become a problem uh, because last 26 months or so, inflation has outpaced earnings growth. So
yeah,
there is a lot of dissatisfaction also among people about rising inflation. So now the Bank of Japan is trying to reverse that by trying to increase the interest rates. And they're also, I think, buying yen in the economy from the economy to help strengthen yen against dollar, because then that also affects inflation.
yeah,
Uh, but everything that happened as a result of that, I think it was also driven a lot by market headlines that a perfect storm is shaping up with a combination of carry trade, Warren Buffett selling shares in Apple,
yeah,
to weak consumption data in US. So I think that the actual impact got magnified as a result of some of these flash headlines.
yeah,
And where we are today is that markets have more or less recovered. Uh, in fact, I think yesterday or very recently, the Q2 data that came out in Japan was very positive in terms of GDP growth, which has been better than expected at 3%. There has been rise in private consumption, capital expenditure. So broadly, the economy is looking good. And I think the third aspect of it is that, which could again bring some of the volatility back, is if the central bank decides to increase interest rates again
Yeah.
in Q4. Uh, so, uh, so there is that uncertainty that remains in the market. But I think in general, the market has realized that that the panic that ensued the last interest rate was overdone. So while there is still volatility, I expect the next interest rate increase to come with a lot less panic in the markets than the last one.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective from the ground because, sometimes when you're reading the news, it can seem like, there is literally frenzy in the market about, what's happening and the whole global financial system is at risk, right? Like if you look at what's happening in the US with the Fed planning to cut interest rates, there are talks about the US going into a recession, and with the carry trade blow up that happened in Japan and so much money being at risk. I think those are very big macro factors to pay attention to as investors as well. But coming to the topic in focus, does that shift the focus from a global GP perspective, investing into an emerging economy? Does that change things for you?
Not really, not at all. In fact, I think we and I think most other global funds as well. I think are in India for the long story, which does not change at all. I think it's remains the brightest spot among most large economies in the world. I think there will always be these volatilities, in the market, but that does not in any way change the overall positive trajectory of the country. And so, as an investor, and in fact, if anything, I think the story is only getting stronger by the day. As we saw from this week's IPOs in the market,
Yeah,
which did really well. So I think, in fact, if anything, if there was a weakness in the Indian story until recently, it was about exits.
yeah,
But I think we are answering that question pretty emphatically, pretty much now every week.
yeah.
So I feel, if anything, the investor interest, including ours, is only going to grow stronger going forward.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear because I think over the last decade, very often in conversations with global LPs, the conversations would be around India is a market that can't deliver exits, or there is no path to an IPO for these companies. But now we have a very booming IPO market and a government that is really supporting companies going public and startups going towards a listing as well. So, how are you looking at the opportunity? Investors used to tell their portfolio companies to go and list elsewhere in different geographies, but now the conversation is also pivoted to listing in India and being market ready for India. So are you seeing that across all your portfolio companies and investments?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, as a Japanese investor, I think we recognize this or we appreciate this even more because, as you may know, the companies get listed in Japan very early.
Yeah.
So the median valuation of companies at IPO in Japan is anywhere between 70 to $110 million.
Wow.
Uh,
Okay.
in India, it's like 10x of that. So we see the size of opportunity is much higher in India compared to Japan. So we appreciate this change in the or development in the ecosystem a lot more because we almost compare it to what we can get out of investing or when our companies in Japan go public. So I think it's a very these signs are very positive for us, and I think most of our companies, in fact, if anything, are thinking of opening subsidiaries to access markets outside India, but none of them are thinking about getting listed outside India.
Right.
It's honestly at this point not even a conversation.
Wow. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of bullishness amongst founders to be able to go for an IPO in India as well. So coming to, you being the India champion within the team, I'm sure, there are certain macro factors that you keep highlighting within the team to talk about the India opportunity. So what are some of the inflection points that you've seen in the country, especially with your experience spanning Gates Foundation and now Global Brain? So that's a decade long experience of investing happening in India? What are some of the inflection points that you've seen personally?
Hmm. See, uh, I think I wouldn't say it was a moment, but I think one big shift, as we all know, has been India's stack.
Yeah,
I think the digitization wave that has gone through the country, particularly in payments, has really you can say woken up investors to the potential of what can happen in India. Not just from a market perspective, that of course it has unlocked huge market, but also from the perspective of adoption of technology. Because always used to be this, hesitation that while it's a large market, it's also very difficult to actually get large, complex projects done or operate on the ground. But implementation of India Stack has completely changed that narrative.
yeah,
So that is one big, I would say, change which has happened over the last decade in India. Second, I would say is also the resilience of the economy. I think, while there has been a lot of volatility in global markets throughout the geopolitical and macroeconomic challenges over the last 5 years, India's economy has remained somewhat resilient. And a lot of it is driven through domestic demand and domestic investments as well. So that has again given global investors like us a lot more belief that in the stability and the longevity of the economy. And the third thing I would say is that just the growth of other foreign funds into India. I think as a global investor, rightly or wrongly, we are always also looking at what are the signals that other global investors are giving towards India.
yeah,
And we are realizing that there is more and more positive sentiment in India. Like recently, I was looking at hiring by venture capital funds in India, and I think if I remember the number correctly, the hiring has grown by almost 30 to 40% in the last 2 years, and one third of that is coming from global VC funds.
yeah,
That shows that people are starting to convert their belief into actual steps on the ground.
yeah.
Um, and so all those things, give us a lot of confidence in the overall trajectory of the country. Of course, there will always be, blips, ups and downs, but we think the overall trend is in the right direction.
Yeah, and speaking of foreign inflows into the country, because you invest from seed to Series B, I'm sure you must have also heard this a lot on the ground that late stage capital is missing in India. What are you seeing in your own portfolio? Are companies actually struggling to raise beyond Series B and upwards?
See, I think, I would say not yet. I don't see, well, let me put it this way. I think it's nothing specific to India. So yes, we have companies which are able to raise successfully at late stage, or companies which are struggling, but that spans across US and India and Europe and so on. So I don't see that as something which is particularly bad or specific to India. I think in general, large checks have become more difficult to get because of several issues globally,
Yeah.
and companies in India are not immune to that. I think, having said that, what I do see happening more and more of is interest from corporate investors in India. So I see more and more Japanese corporate investors investing from their balance sheet directly into companies and writing large checks. Similarly, corporates in India investing more into companies, which is to some extent filling the gap from late stage VC funds coming into Series C or later investments. So, I feel in general, of course, there is an overall broad macroeconomic slowdown which is affecting India as well, but there are also some tailwinds from corporate investors, which is mitigating some of that risk.
Right. And are you seeing this as a sign of maturing of the Indian ecosystem? Whereas if you compare it to what the US market, obviously we are not there yet in terms of, being able to generate the large size impact in terms of returns that some of the US companies have delivered previously. But if you look at the India market now, where would you say we are in the cycle?
Yeah, see, I think in some ways we still have a long way to go. At across the spectrum, not just about late stage exits, but also very early stage risks. As we often hear, right, that what we are missing in the Indian market today is perhaps product led companies
Yeah.
which can have a global market. But some of that requires a very large amount of early stage patient capital. And when it comes to that, India market is still very limited compared to what's possible in the US. Just recently, we were looking at a semiconductor company and in based out of India, which was trying to raise, I think, $5 or $8 million. And while doing the competitive analysis, we found another company which is trying to build the same technology based out of US, but it has recently received $50 million grant from DARPA, so,
Mm.
non-dilutive capital to build the same technology. So how do you compete against some of that when you are building in India? So some
Yeah.
of those questions we as an ecosystem are yet to answer. And I think on the late stage side, I think what uh, I feel is starting to happen is also some of the domestic private equity funds are starting to raise large capital
Yeah.
to be able to invest. So I feel that the the difference between private equity and venture capital is sort of fading away. And so I see a lot more private equity funds taking or entering venture capital stage investments. So that is also mitigating some of these lack of late stage investing in India.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little more because private equity in terms of return profile usually they would aim at say 10 to 30x kind of an outcome, whereas venture capital it's all about 100x, 80x, 100x kind of outcome. So that's a very different return profile that they look at. But as the players, as you rightly said, are converging in some sense where they're looking at the same opportunities, what happens in the ecosystem as a result of that? Does the return profile of the venture landscape start reducing, or private equity generates better returns? How would you classify it as an LP looking outside?
Yeah, see, I think honestly, that's yet to be played out. So, I don't know if I have a good answer to that. But in general, I believe it's good for the ecosystem, because having private equity on your cap table does enforce a different level of governance and management standard than venture capital alone.
Yeah.
And I think that is a welcome change. So therefore, I personally view that in the long run, I think it's a positive development for building large companies in India because venture capital funds and private equity funds are very complementary in terms of the skills they bring to the table. And uh, so I find that to be positive. And from my experience also of engaging with some of the private equity funds, I think that they are also approaching it in a very thoughtful way. So instead of trying to, like you were pointing out, instead of trying to enforce a private equity mental model into a very early stage company, I think most funds also understand what is needed to take an early stage company to where it becomes ready for large injection of capital,
Yeah.
and therefore tailor their role to make that happen instead of being in conflict with early stage investors. So based on my experience of some of the companies where I have co-invested with private equity funds, it has been overwhelmingly a positive experience both for our fund as well as for the company themselves.
That's very interesting because I'm also seeing signs of that in our portfolio where, private equity players are investing as early as, say, Series A and B also, where,
Hmm.
there's some more predictability in the business and there's a playbook that's been established. So the company has been de risked to a certain extent. But since you
Hmm.
touched upon that issue of governance and corporate issues within companies. Let's also talk about that a little bit. Given there have been blow-ups like Byju's that recently happened, and so much more around corporate governance issues within startups in India. Does that impact the sentiment of global LPs investing into India? And do these examples, because they are very significant examples, right, in terms of how much capital was deployed into these companies, how does that affect the sentiment of someone who's investing from a global lens into India?
Yeah. See, I think the short answer is of yes, it does. There is no doubt about it. I think I get asked about it both internally in our fund from other investors in Japan or other investors in Europe or North America that I work with. Uh, but having said that, there is also the other side of it. Just to give you an example, we ourselves have a complete, um, you can say, a casebook of lapses in governance in companies in Japan, that we use to train young investment professionals.
Right.
So when they're doing due diligence of companies, what are some of the cases that they should look for, which is based on real life instances in Japanese companies. And at the same time, for every Byju's or Go Mechanic in India, there's also an FTX or Theranos in US. So that's not to say that that's because it's happening in other countries, it's okay, it should happen in other countries as well. That's not the point. But I think what I try to do when these issues come up is to ensure that in VC ecosystem in India is not considered to be an anomaly when it comes to such issues. These happens across the board.
Right.
And now, of course, what can we do to be better than others? What are the things that can be done in India or by investors, by founders together to make this a more credible place where global investors can put their money with higher degree of confidence. I think that's where I like to operate. My personal view is also that we cannot just put all the responsibility on the founders, something which I have come across that look, as an investor, we are hands off. There is nothing we can do if a founder is doing something which is unethical or illegal. I believe that seems a bit of a cop out. I
Right.
think if you know, uh, we are in it together, so we have to be accountable in terms of choices we are making, in terms of partners we are choosing, or how we are able to engage in building the company, and be an equal thought partner of the founders in successes and failures.
Yeah, it's so refreshing to hear that because that's not what we've seen so far, at least in the fiascos, where, the investors have literally written off responsibility from them onto the founders. And that's happened time and again. But I think, you operating from a global lens are able to add a very balanced and global perspective to it, which is very refreshing to hear. But Anjani, you also started an angel fund. Tell us a little bit more about that. What led you to start that? And did you want to go even earlier in terms of investing into companies?
I think that was it. I feel like, in general, I really enjoy working with entrepreneurs, and both myself and a group of friends, we all thought that it'll be, uh, to be honest, more than anything, it will be just a great way for us to do something together, and invest in some really brilliant people at an early stage when they're just thinking about an idea. And so it just came together very quickly. We invested in 6 companies or so, wrote seed stage checks across US and India, in financial services, agriculture, food, alternate protein, SaaS for media enterprises, all kinds of businesses. And it mostly came out of the desire to take early stage risk and also do something together with a group of very strong professionals and close friends.
Amazing. So now that you've done such diverse investments and that too in private markets, what is your investment philosophy now? And has it evolved over a period of time? And which is the stage that you personally enjoy the most in terms of investing?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, definitely. I think, it has evolved over time for sure. I think um, also depends on the market, I feel like, I feel I have to maybe touch across a few points. I put a lot more weight on on the experience of the founder. So, I believe that India, for markets like India, in most cases, the idea of move fast, break things does not work.
Yeah.
And therefore, having founders who are more mature, have deep knowledge of the sector, and derive their strengths from not being disruptive, but derive their strength from being uh, knowledgeable and passionate. I think, I feel I like to work more with those founders. Whereas early on, when I first started investing, I was only about disruption. So I think that has changed or evolved in how I approach things when it comes to identifying investments. Um, Second, I have also perhaps started to put more emphasis on founders who give attention to detail and not just be a good storyteller. uh, Again, this has changed. Early when I first started investing, I used to be all about vision. Okay, we need to have a grand vision, and everything else follows. But I have now realized that a whistle does not drive the train. So while being an entrepreneur, you need to have good storytelling or skill and be a visionary. It cannot be done at the cost of attention to detail. And so when looking for investment opportunities or founders, I believe I look for those signals. And lastly, I would say, which is perhaps, I don't know how important it is, but it's a pattern which I have noticed in the founders that have been successful in terms of my personal engagement, have been founders who are very respectful of their competitors. Most often I find successful founders appreciate what their competitors are doing well, and are willing to acknowledge that publicly, and learn from that and adapt accordingly rather than dismissing the competition.
Right.
And I look for these signs, I would say, or few signs when I'm looking for investing into a company.
And across all your investments, what would you say has been your favorite turnaround story? A company that you thought that wouldn't make it, but impressed you nevertheless.
Yeah, I think I would say the story is still continuing. But if I have to pick one, there is a company that we invested in US. It's a robotics company called EarthSense. And I think we invested. It's a challenging business because when it comes to hardware, selling hardware is always a difficult proposition. But we invested in that company primarily based on the engineering talent of the team. It comes out of University of Illinois, a very talented team of engineers uh, building first of its kind robots to collect data from fields on the ground, and also do it autonomously. So you don't have to actually drive the robots drive themselves. But they found it very difficult initially, even though the technology was great. Building the right set of use cases was not very easy in terms of actually getting customers to buy into it and pay for it beyond POCs or even if you go beyond POCs, you actually order a large number of robots to pay for it. But now I think they have started there through a series of experimentations, trying different customer profiles. They have been successful at landing two large contracts, which can significantly turn around the business because it gives them more capital to invest in the company to build more products for other use cases as well. And I think it boils down to their conviction in their technological capabilities. You know,
Yeah.
they knew that they could address the market because of the technical depth in the team. And that's the beauty of being, a founder who understands the technology. That you can adapt to where the market is, and you're not trying to you don't just have a hammer and looking for a nail, but you have this technological expertise that can be molded to shape products according to the market. And so I really feel great about where things are heading with that company. Um, but as you know very well, Shrishti, these I feel that the turnaround stories are a bit more glamorized. I think
Yeah.
turnarounds happen on a weekly or a monthly basis in these companies. And I think that's where the real beauty is, how they're addressing the day-to-day challenges and ups and downs.
Absolutely. I think in the life of a founder, there are many lows sometimes in the same month, day, and
Yeah.
even the hour, right? So they are navigating a very different world altogether when it comes to dealing with highs and lows. It's a completely roller coaster of a journey. But given your global experience, Anjani, how do you see India faring compared to other countries in terms of innovation in sectors such as deep tech and AI?
Yeah. See, I think the good things that we see in India are a lot. There is a lot more activity in building products in areas of deep tech and AI than I did, say, 5 years ago. So clearly there is a wave of entrepreneurs, also investors specifically focused on these type of companies, and also I would say a lot of public resources, whether it is research-focused incubators or universities like IIT Chennai, IIT Delhi, IISc, which are putting more resources behind entrepreneurs that are trying to build deep tech-related products. So I think in general there is a lot of tailwind to build these businesses in India, which is I think a great positive development. Uh, Having said that, as we were discussing earlier, we still have a long way to go. Our public R&D spend as a percentage of our GDP remains minuscule, so that needs to grow significantly. Availability of patient capital is again remains a big gap compared to what's needed. Of course, the recent announcement about, I think it was 1,000 crores of early stage venture capital
Yeah.
being
A
available for
space tech
space
fund.
startups.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good start in that direction. We have similar such facilities from other sources as well, like DST and few others, but that needs to grow exponentially for us to be able to compete with the likes of Europe or US. So I think it's the positive, like I said, a lot of potential, which I think is only growing stronger, but yet to be done in terms of access to patient capital that is necessary for these businesses to thrive.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. But the good thing in this year's budget was the focus on the startup economy, right? Both from an investor perspective and also fueling deep tech in India, which is very fascinating to see that as a country we are focusing on that. So, if it comes from top down, there is so much innovation that can be fostered across the country. So, hopefully, there'll be a big positive shift in the economy as we grow. Anjani, let's also talk about navigating failures, right? Because as an investor, failure is often a part of the entrepreneurial and investor journey. How do you approach failures in your investments, and what lessons have you learned from some of them?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, I think we fail far more than we succeed
All the time.
as investors.
Yeah.
And I think, I would say, the many lessons from failures. I guess the first lesson is humility. I think, you know, uh, I, I perhaps have become more conscious of my view of the world and the biases that I bring to the table when I am trying to assess a problem. And I think that is something which through my failures, I try to do a bit more consciously, is to be more patient with views which are uh, that don't agree with mine, and try to force myself into into looking at things with a more open mind. And it's a very difficult thing to do. I feel
Yeah.
in fact, I was reading about it somewhere that you know this is related to physics, principles of thermodynamics and physics, you know, that uh, uh, your current state of mind is a low entropy state, so you don't need a lot of energy to exist in that state. But if you want to think differently, then you need to shift to a high entropy state, and you need to exert energy to do that. And human psychology by default and human body by default does not want to do that. So it's not easy. It's not just an emotional thing. It's actually, there's physics behind how human body is not designed to think beyond its own personal view of the world. And so it requires a lot of energy, to be able to practice humility. Uh, I think that is one of the biggest lessons for me. And second, which may sound counterintuitive, is also not to ignore my instincts. I also feel that, often, because, I think someone mentioned to me that, instincts are nothing but experiences distilled. So, when I'm working with people or on a particular problem, if there is something I, which bothers me, uh, sometimes, I would just let it go. I was like, let's not worry about that, because perhaps there is a bigger attraction that I want to focus on. But now I'm also more aware of being cognizant of what I think is not something is not right about this, and be able to dig into it to make sure that I understand the problem rather than just ignoring it. Uh,
Right.
so I think those are a couple of lessons which some of my failures have taught, and I uh, try to not make those mistakes again.
And what's your self talk when you're going through something like this?
There, I guess it goes back to my banking days. To be honest, when I first you know uh, was work started working, the the personality style is very blunt in banking, right?
Yeah.
But when I'm going through these issues now, I think my first instinct is how to make sure that I stay balanced and I stay kind, when dealing with these problems. Because at the end of the day, I do try to keep in mind that we are, amongst the most fortunate people in the world at the end of the day. And so, how do I make sure that I address these problems with a balanced mind and not get too worked up about things, and make sure that other people who are involved in solving these problems also have, a positive experience, regardless of how tough the issues at hand are. And approaching it with that mindset uh, is now more important to me than it ever was. And that's the most important thing I try to tell myself, you know, uh, because at the end of the day, we are all, in general, I believe that most people are trying to do the right thing, but we have different perspectives with which we approach problems. And it's important to be kind to each other, uh, than uh, than be right and blunt.
Absolutely. I think that's such a beautiful note because kindness in any situation, especially during these tough situations, is so important and it truly has a deeper impact compared to the successful times, right? For anyone on the team as well, or people you were dealing with. So coming to your personal mission, Anjani, what's been your personal mission in life? What is the North Star that you're working towards? You've had such a fantastic career with diverse experiences. What is the driving force behind you?
Yeah, I think, I think it's, uh, part of it is I believe, that I want to use my skills and experiences um to to improve lives, and honestly, it's still a journey I'm on, still trying to figure out what is the best way I can contribute. I do believe in the power of private sector innovation and enterprise. And I think I want to there's a lot more to be done to truly harness that potential. I think sometimes I used to be very passionate about impact investing. I still am, but not the way it is defined. I think it has more or less lost its meaning and purpose. And so hopefully, I still believe that there are ways in which some of that intent can be brought back to impact investing, which can truly mean a positive change for a large number of people through building enterprises and companies. And I feel like through my journey, I can get to a place where I can contribute to that agenda, if you will, in a meaningful way. And while doing that, have positive influence on as many people as I can. And uh, in fact, very recently a friend shared a quote with me from Albert Einstein. He said that, see, everybody is a genius, but you cannot assess the performance of a fish by asking it to climb a tree. And I want to keep that in mind, as I'm on this journey.
Absolutely. And Jeff Bezos has his regret minimization framework, which is very popular, where he thinks of his life from the age of 80 backwards and takes a lot of life decisions that way. So, what do you think your profound insights will be at the age of 80? Specifically, distill it into one significant learning, one regret, and a pivotal life decision.
Hmm. See, I would say, I think one significant learning will be definitely, as I was mentioning earlier, to positively influence lives of as many people as possible. I think it's because I feel that because that's something we can or I can do every day. It does not require, it's not dependent on anybody else. It's 100% under my control, and I can practice that every day. And I think, I feel like that's something I would like to, when I will look back when I'm 80, and if I feel like, okay, yeah, I had a positive influence on life of so many people in a small or a big way, I think that will make me very happy. In terms of a regret, I would say that I may have, or I maybe sometimes I still have, is not acting on what I do soon enough. So sometimes I feel that I've waited longer than I should have. Simple things. It could be as simple as you know I only started playing tennis seriously when I was in my late 20s. I should have done it earlier. I started
Right,
eating healthy when I was in my late 30s. I should have done that earlier, and that goes reflects in my professional career as well. Some of the changes I made, I could have made it few years sooner.
right,
So now I do believe that I want to act faster when I know I want to do something rather than wait.
right.
Uh, and what was the
And
third
one
part?
pivotal life decision.
Yeah, see, that's a very difficult one because I don't have a pivotal life decision. Uh, but I think uh, I guess it is something that Jeff Bezos said. Maybe it's not a specific decision, but I think he did say, right, that he would regret not doing something more than doing it and failing at it. So I think I try to live by that philosophy, that it's okay to take the risk, and try things, and approach decisions in that way. uh, you know, yeah, not to be too comfortable with where I am, and keep things interesting.
Love it. And what a beautiful note to end our episode with as well. I think, you come across as such a balanced, kind individual and with such a deep passion for making a true impact in people's lives. So much more power to you, Anjani, as you continue to grow in the investment world and as an investor and individually as well. So thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to host you. If you have time for it, we can quickly do a rapid fire segment if you're up for it.
Yeah, sure, happy
Yeah.
to.
Okay, awesome. Are there any books, podcasts, or resources that have had a profound impact on your life or career?
Yeah, I think I would say, a couple of books that come to mind right away is one is Team of Rivals. I think it was quite interesting in how you can, this was focused on Abraham Lincoln, but how you can work with people who are really your most staunch enemies and opponents, and yet put together a team that can achieve a higher goal. And another book I read recently, which was very interesting, is called An Immense World. And I found that book very interesting because I'm not an animal person, but that book essentially gives you a perspective of how animals view the world, and completely changed now how every time I look at a street dog or a eagle in Bangalore.
Love it. I haven't read either of those. I will definitely make sure to read them. One professional and one personal goal over the next year.
Yeah, I think the professional goal is definitely to, as a fund, have a more strategic and systematic approach to investments in India. As I was mentioning earlier, I think in our initial couple of years, we have been a bit more opportunistic. But going forward, we want to be more thoughtful and strategic in how we select investments and build our portfolio. And on the personal side, I've been working hard on my tennis, so I want to hit the 5.0 USTA rating, hopefully in next 12 months.
All the best to you for that. Which person has had the most formative impact on your life?
It's a difficult one, because honestly, I don't think there is a one person there, because I have worked with a lot of brilliant people and I've tried to, extract a nugget of their brilliance, and try to add that to my personality. So I would say that's a long list.
Awesome. If you were to write a book about your life, what would the title be?
I think I would call it Not All Those Who Wander Are Lost.
Amazing. Name one of your role models.
I think, one of my role models is my sister. I think, she has a unique personality because she is a leader in a very large global company, who is, everyone just loves her. And she is, of course, does a brilliant job and great at what she does, but she's able to do it in a way that people love working for her. And I always feel that is something I could do more of.
What are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of the fact that I have mostly followed what I wanted to do and have not let comfort stop me from trying things.
And what's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
See, apart from my family, who are very kind to me every day, I guess, I would say, I had a friend. I find it very amazing. Often when I lived in Seattle, I would travel a lot, and I would come back after, say, a week or 2 weeks traveling, and late at night or early morning. But my friend would come and just stock my fridge with food and buy groceries in the middle of the night so that I have something to eat when I come back home. And I found that to be amazingly kind.
That's really sweet and must have helped you deal with the Seattle weather as well.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Anjani. I think this was a brilliant episode. There's so much in terms of deep insights that founders can learn from as they reach out to you to be able to partner with Global Brain, hopefully and potentially. Thank you for making the time, and it's always a pleasure interacting with you.
Yeah, thanks, Shrishti, for the opportunity. You are a wonderful host, and hope to catch you again soon.